I would like to note that registration fees only make up a portion of the cost to present our virtual workshops and artist talks. I want to acknowledge that this activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through grants from the Minnesota State Arts Board, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Without further delay, I'm happy to introduce the MCBA host, Annika Schneider, Director of Exhibitions and Artist Programs.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us virtually tonight. Again, my name is Annika Schneider, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Exhibitions and Artist Programs at Minnesota Center for Book Arts. MCBA is a book arts nonprofit located in downtown Minneapolis. MCBA celebrates the book as a vibrant contemporary art form that takes many shapes, from the traditional crafts of papermaking, letterpress printing, and hand bookbinding to experimental art making and self-publishing techniques. MCBA supports the limitless creative evolution of book arts through book arts workshops and programming for adults, youth, families, K-12 students, teachers, and through exhibitions and more. I am happy to have Shift Lab Collective join us tonight to talk about their collaborative processes. Shift Lab, for those of you who don't know, is a collective including Katie Baldwin, based in Huntsville, Alabama, Denise Bookwalter in Tallahassee, Florida, Sarah Bryant in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Macy Chadwick in Petaluma, California, and Tricia Treacy in Lebanon, New Hampshire. They have collaborated on artist books and multiples for the past decade. It has been an honor to bring Shift Lab 10 years of collaboration to life in our main gallery. If you have not had the chance and are in town, I highly encourage you to see the exhibition, which will be up until June 1st. And definitely please join us next Friday, March 8th, from 6 to 8 p.m. in MCBA's main gallery, where all 5 artists will be in attendance. If you are interested in delving into the collaborative process more with Shift Lab artists, please sign up for the in-person workshop at MCBA, which will take place Saturday, the 9th, the day after their reception. We will first hear from the Shift Lab artists and then move to moderated Q&A. Please utilize Zoom's Q&A features so we can track questions during this talk. I am now going to hand it over to Denise to begin Shift Lab's talk. Thank you all.
Thank you, Annika. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're really excited to give you a glimpse into Shift Lab, our process, and our collaboration. We had a lot of fun preparing this talk for you. And as Annika said, we've been working for 10 years. And we often get asked some of the same questions over and over again. And these questions are what we will use to build the conversation today. But we will begin with some readings of 2 of our projects. Each reading will include an introduction, and you'll see a video of the book on the left of the screen, and on the right of the screen, you will see photographs from the making of that book. We will continue then with the questions that we get asked often, and then a few more readings, and then a few more questions. The aim is for you to glimpse our collaborative process and get an introduction to our work. And for those of you in Minnesota, we do hope that you will join us at the exhibition to experience our work in person. So let's begin with Katie Baldwin. She will read a selection from our most recent artist book, Multiple Discovery.
Hi, so just to give you a little bit of a sense of Multiple Discovery, we made this artist book between 2019 and 2022. And multiple discovery occurs when innovations are made independently and simultaneously in different locations. And in this project, we use multiple discovery as a metaphor for our own remote collaborative practice. So to read a little bit about from the project, I'm going to start with an excerpt from Tricia Treacy's book. You can see here on the screen the different iterations of the project. Unspoken connections to ourselves, those around us, and the landscape. Objects document the past while grounded in the present. An iron plate used as currency, weaponry, thatchwork, maps, metals, dishes, musical instruments, buttons, lace, pattern. A story untold underneath another encounter. material voice. Independently and simultaneously work with the tools you are given. It is an increased process, similar in forms to the vibrations of the air, stillness. And then to contrast Tricia's text with mine, I'll read a section from my book next. A herd, a group, a rotating paddle wheel, an action condensed into a horizon, together heading in the same direction, an imposed stillness, the world represented as a place of objects, an iron plate, a map, a magnet, a dish. Thatchwork, coiling wire, a particular species of bamboo, a transformation of a circular space into a linear image. So in this project, you can see 4 examples of the books here on the screen. We had a common horizon line and common color palette, and then we developed imagery for the artist book in our separate studios. Printed sheets were exchanged in batches of 10, and then individually we wrote and printed text gathered from a shared collection of source material. And then everything was collated and folded, and a unique set of 10 copies were created. So the result is an edition of 50 books, but there are 5 variations in this project.
Thank you, Katie. So now we will move from our most recent artist book project to our first artist book project. Macy Chadwick will be reading from Shift.
Hey, everybody. Shift was our very first project we did in 2014. And for the prompt, each of us created a small book of identical dimensions to reflect her interpretation of the word shift. So Tricia Treacy describes hers as characters used to communicate shift between words. Denise made her book inspired by the shifting form of a piece of paper from flat to crumpled. And Katie Baldwin, her concept was the 3 diggings of the Erie Canal. So I'm going to read a little bit from Katie's book now. A spherical world, tools for navigation, digging the canal by hand, the shortest distance between 2 points. Starting with 363 miles, travel by the speed of sound, a set of points in a plane, a given distance from a point, digging deeper and wider. Digging even deeper, digging ever wider, finding a faster way, connecting the east to the west time zones. Sarah Bryant's book was The Shifting Body in Bed. So she was having some trouble sleeping during this time, so that was her inspiration. It reads, without movement, we shift in our sleep. We cannot change in content. A change in perception. We cannot change in the wind. We cannot sleep. And lastly, my book was A Shift in Perspective. 2 views of the same conversation from 2 different mindsets, the romantic and the logical. So I'll read to you from that book. Meanwhile, we're seeing Denise's book here on the screen. So the romantic side, the romantic mindset in my book reads, your words, evocative and resonant, neatly string and cue. This gauzy gathering of confidences, assurances, trajectories draws me in. With each utterance, eddies of optimism captivate and enchant me. And every pause holds a visionary space for my innumerable imaginings.
Thank you, Macy. So to move to some of our questions that we often get, the question we most often get is about our origin story. How did we meet? When? Why? We all have a slightly different memory and of the details of this origin story. But the most important part of this question is, what was the original intent of the collective? And why did we get together? What was our main reason for collaborating? And what was our original goal or plan? And so I'm going to ask Macy if you can give us some insight on that question.
Sure, and I'm happy if you guys join in together. We do have all different reasons or stories about how and when we drew together. So really our the intent of Shift Lab is to join together for projects, shows, and book fairs. It came about from a series of conversations about the different skills and approaches we have to studio practice. So I remember it as 2009 at a book conference with Katie and Tricia over a beer saying, hey, you're really good at building boxes and I'm really good at printing. Why don't we get together and make some projects? And just kind of, it took it from there. So Katie and Tricia continued the conversation and gathered Denise and Sarah, who they had met in different places. And we formed a group in around 2013, doing our first project in 2014. So the goal of Shift Lab is collaboration and skill sharing, but really it's rooted in friendship. And we investigate the narrative of the book, and we study the shift in contemporary perspectives relating to both the digital and analog experiences of the book. And we just have a really good time together. So does anyone else want to
I can jump in too and say one of the most important things, I think, even though it's the least glamorous of not that there's a whole lot of glamour in our
in book arts, yeah,
is that, you know, the sometimes the practicalities of working as an artist. And at the time we formed, I was an independent artist living in the UK. Some of those practicalities are just kind of insurmountable, like how to financially get myself to the International Book Fair where we sell work, you know, and working together really made it possible for us to band together and share out some of those expenses in a way that was made it possible for us to kind of move forward. So even though it may not have been the primary goal of working together, it certainly helped us sort of advance ourselves because we were approaching these things as a collective, which was a little easier. So.
And I think this is a good point. I skipped a moment that we were supposed to go around and give a brief introduction for each of us. And I think one of the key things is that we really were living apart from each other, and how do we create community by working together. And we were very familiar with working over Zoom and Skype, well, Skype at the time. But why don't we take a minute really quickly here and do some quick introductions, even though now we are already in the middle. But Katie, and then we can kind of get some perspective about where we started and where we are now. So Katie, would you like to do your introduction?
Yeah, so my name's Katie Baldwin, and when we were talking about beginning Shift Lab, I was moving from Aurora, New York to Huntsville, Alabama to begin a new job. And over the course of the decade that we've been working together, there's been tons of changes in my own life. And just like a quick significant one is that I received tenure, and then I was able to take a year to sabbatical to focus on my work. And then also personal changes, which we'll all talk about. But my most exciting personal change is I'm now a grandma.
So I'm Denise Bookwalter, and I live in Tallahassee, Florida. And I've lived in Tallahassee, Florida the whole time we have been collaborators. I am unique. I am here. The press that I run, Small Craft Advisory Press, is celebrating its 15 years of publication. I teach printmaking and book arts at Florida State University. And I think the biggest change for me, beyond what I've done here with my career in the university, is that when we began, I did not have children, but now I have 9-year-old twins.
We're going in alphabetical order, so I think I'm next.
I think so.
But when we started, as I mentioned, I was an independent artist. I was living in the UK. I had just moved there, and I felt quite a distance from the community of makers and artists that I'd been part of in the US. But in the intervening 10 years, now I'm living in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I'm raising a child who is now 8. And I am, I'm working and teaching graduate students. So a lot of things have changed, but a lot of the opportunities that have been, that have moved me forward have come, partly in part through the collective. So that's me.
That was Sarah Bryant. I'm Macy Chadwick, and I was living in Oakland and working as an adjunct teacher when Shift Lab started. And then I moved up to Petaluma, California, and started an artist residency. So I didn't have a child, but the residency was my version of that. And so lots of changes in my life through this last decade of working together too.
I'm Tricia Treacy, and I am currently located in Lebanon, New Hampshire, where my studio is. I was living in Philadelphia when these beginning conversations happened, and soon after relocated to Western North Carolina to work at Appalachian State as an assistant professor, and have since moved to the Upper Valley in New England to work at Dartmouth and run the print department. So lots of changes, lots of shifts. I would just add that Katie, Macy, and I are all graduates of the UArts Book Arts program. And I think that was something that kind of connected us before we even knew each other very well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll hand it back to Denise.
Okay, well, I'm going to hand it to Macy to ask the next question, unless you want me to go ahead and ask it.
No, I'll ask it.
Okay, go ahead, Macy.
So we often get the question about how we collaborate as a group of 5 and how we collaborate from a distance. So take it away, Sarah. What's your response to that?
Yeah. So I think that it is challenging, first of all, to work as 5 people, because we don't always agree on what we want to be doing. And of course, it's a challenge to be so far removed from each other. When we started, I was in England, Macy was in California. Even just arranging a time where we all could talk was almost insurmountable half the time. I will obviously be open to people having a different interpretation of what I'm saying here, but I think that the way that we typically have worked is that we try to have an in-person meeting, which is very unusual for all of us to be able to get to, but usually we have a critical mass of 4 or 3 where we develop an idea, we think up what we want to be working on next. And then through a series of either Skype calls in the past or Zoom calls now, Google Docs and independent research, and occasionally meetings with 2 or 3 of us, we produce the projects and then meet again, usually at a book fair, and then try to hatch a new project when we're all together again. So that's sort of been the cycle of production. And I welcome other thoughts about how that's been working. Oh, do you know what? I did want to say, perhaps it would be nice for us to highlight one project and talk about how that evolved. Since we are looking at REF right now, maybe I'll talk about that one. And I'll do a reading from that a little bit down the line. But REF, for example, was kind of a big project that we hatched at a codex, I think in 2017, when we were together in California, thinking about how we could we're always trying to figure out how to make one project that is collaborative and involves all of our voices. And REF began as the idea that we would each investigate a single book, and then slowly over the course of time, a series of calls, a long period of production, it became became broader and became an investigation of the whole reference section of the library. So I'm going to turn it over. I've been talking too long. Somebody else needs to chime in here. So
Well, I think that's a good spot to ask this question about, I think that the way that we have worked over time really has changed. And one of the specifics that we could look at is the most recent project, Multiple Discovery, and think about how specifically the pandemic really influenced how we collaborated on that project. So I don't know who wants to start that conversation, but thinking about, we started that project before the pandemic started, but it was greatly influenced by the project changed a lot based on that we could not be together. Originally, we had talked about creating this book with multiple pages, and that we would get together in different places and collate them differently each place that we met. Obviously, there was no travel during the pandemic, so that changed. So does anybody want to speak specifically to how the pandemic might have evolved or driven this specific project?
I mean, I can speak a little bit to it because I think that when we initially decided what we were going to do, we were actually in Petaluma, if I remember correctly, and sort of doing mock-ups together and really visualizing these kind of gatherings where we would have these live binding events. And once we realized we wouldn't be able to gather, we kind of decided to, this idea of multiple discovery, that innovations are being made independently, and at the same time, but in different locations, seem to be actually very related. And we just kind of leveraged that idea, leaned into it a little bit more, and really focused on making our printed pages in separate studios and then shipping them to each other. And then we bound the books, our own set of books. And so I think in some ways ends up being this very interesting relationship between the work as a whole or as a group, and then the kind of individual hand in each of the projects.
I think too, there was just going back to planning as a group, there were decisions that had to be made at the front end. I feel like I'm just like the voice of practicality tonight, but there are decisions that had to be made at the front end that made it possible for us to make a book. I think that there's sometimes, if you're passing, the idea of a collaboration as like a kind of pass and print, I'll do something and then you'll do something and then you'll do something. I don't think we ever were totally into that idea unless it had some framing that really made it a cohesive project. So for us, for this project, there was the idea of multiple discovery as a concept, simultaneous invention, things bubbling up in different regions on Earth at the same time. The idea that we would use formal elements like very specific colors and that horizon line. And then the idea that we would be able to bind it differently, but using a kind of structure that allowed it to be kind of modular. So even though we were all making 10 copies that were identical in an edition of 50, there were kind of tactics that we were using to make it possible for them all still to be cohesive, like the title page and the spine piece and the cover material and all that kind of stuff.
An interesting example of that, sorry to jump in on there, I don't know who that was, but Sarah mentioned that we had to make certain decisions, and we decided to work with Riso colors that I had access to in North Carolina. I got most of my book printed before I left. I didn't know I would be moving. And then when the book was finished, I had completely different Riso colors. So I had to, we made these big decisions based on a palette that I had access to and then lost that access. So that was an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in and just say that there's a certain delight to working separately with a group of artists that you really admire, and then receiving their pages in the mail and realizing that they all speak to each other, in this really wonderful aesthetic way. They're all very different, but they all relate. And we always mean to put images in a Google folder and share them as we're going, but I can't think of a time that we all actually did. And so, this idea of getting these pages in the mail and being like, oh my God, I can't wait to see what Katie printed, and then having it be like Christmas as I open the package, and then comparing them to what Sarah sent and what Denise sent and what Tricia sent, and realizing that the cohesiveness that we were striving for really did happen, and it's that trust that it will happen, because we're like throwing these ideas out and then like, okay, guys, let's see what comes of it.
And I love seeing them in this video just like this, where you really get to see a bunch of the different variations at once. And again, we see 4 of them here. It's pretty difficult to put 5 of them in the slide. So just imagine the 5th one. But seeing them flip through all at the same time is really the way that you should look at it. Everyone should try that.
Yeah.
So I think at this point, what we can do is we'll return back to our reading of some of these books. I'm always talking to my students that it's important to not only look at the images, but also read the artist books. And so Sarah, I'm going to turn this over to Sarah to read a selection of Ref.
Ref was kind of a big, complicated project. So before I read, I'm going to read a brief description that hopefully will give you some context for what you're looking at. This was a project from 2019. So Ref is an investigation into the erosion of the physical reference area of the library and the fundamental shift taking place in the way we ask and answer questions. Reference sources. I teach in a library school as a book artist, so I feel like this one is pretty close to my day-to-day life. Reference sources evolved over hundreds of years to answer specific types of questions that have emerged over time as we have sought to engage with information. Atlases, chronologies, encyclopedias, directories, and other related reference types, each developed in order to satisfy a particular way that we pose questions. Where did it happen? When did it happen? Who was responsible? What else was happening during this time? How was this accomplished? Now we've moved away from the use of these resources toward keyword searches and algorithm. And as a result, we're able to access information with great speed, but we're losing the aspect of translation that enabled us to seek nuanced answers to carefully posed questions. So for this book, we created a reference section of our own that includes 15 components, each of them inspired by a traditional reference type. They're housed together in a flip-top box, and as an organizing principle for the project, we selected dates that were related to the shift away from the use of reference text toward our reliance on algorithm and algorithmic relevance. So that's something in 1963, the publication of the Automation and Library of Congress, which is known as the King Report, the Gore Bill in 91, the publication of an important text in 93, and the release of Wikipedia in 2001. So that was sort of our material that we were working with. And now I will very briefly, after that long introduction, read from the Almanac, which an almanac is a 1-volume work with statistics or a compilation of specific facts. So for this text, the language from the Farmer's Almanac, Best Days, and the King Report to the Library of Congress is paired with the length of days for the first day of each month in 1963. Buy a house, lay shingles, wash wooden floors, cut hair to encourage growth, monitor use of the collection, 9 hours and 30 minutes of daylight. Make sauerkraut, start diet to lose weight, improve automated processes, get married, set eggs, 10 hours and 14 minutes of daylight. Ask for a loan, convert existing files to machine-readable form, perform demolition, castrate animals, 11 hours and 19 minutes of daylight. Brew beer, dig holes, set posts or pour concrete, cut hair to discourage growth, plant below-ground crops, become westerly or southwesterly, wean children, 12 hours and 37 minutes of daylight. Mow to slow growth, destroy pests and weeds, start projects, lay shingles, slaughter livestock, 13 hours and 49 minutes of daylight. Quit smoking, potty train, record acquisitions, graft or pollinate, harvest above ground crops, dry fruit and vegetables, go camping.
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to keep watching the objects come out of that box. But But I think if you are I did hear that possibly at the opening, at the reception, we might have this one that you can look through.
There is a handling copy at the exhibition, so you can look at all of these components yourself. And I want to say one more thing about this book, which is just as Macy was saying, it was fun to get things in the mail. I remember when we came to Codex with this book for the first time, none of us had seen the whole book. I came with the enclosure, and then we just like crossed our fingers that everything would actually fit inside of the box. And it was the first time any of us had seen most of what was going in. So it was a pretty amazing high stakes moment.
And I want to note for the mothers who are here, for some of our mothers who are here listening, that the bibliography is the list of sources and it includes images of our mothers. So my mom didn't recognize herself. I'm like, Mom, that's you. But it was an older picture, like from her college years. So it's just a sweet note to those here on the Zoom.
Oh, good. We got to see all of it. So now we are ready for Trace. And so I invite Tricia to give us a reading from Trace and a little bit of background on that project.
So Trace was an opportunity for us to examine a space where we were living at the time, and possibly a modification of that space. So we each had 5 different sites. Each site was where we were living at the time that we made the book. We worked with a single page structure similar to a foldable map. A 6-piece was printed by Denise using the software processing to visualize translated sounds that we all gave to her of each location that we worked with. I'm going to read just a short quote about each place that we all worked with for our books. And I'll start with Katie Baldwin. Her site was the Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, a 3,700-acre fenced-in army post, formerly a chemical weapons manufacturing facility for World War II. As a civilian, I could not go into the arsenal. However, I walked along the fence that lies along the perimeter of the land. Denise Bookwalter, Ocklackney Clay Mine in Georgia, a surface mine in southeast Georgia that mines absorbent clay used for chemical processing and kitty litter. The clay is found in deposits trending northeast across Florida Panhandle into southern Georgia. I traveled 43.8 miles from my house to tour the mine, the same trip my husband takes across the state line every weekday. Next, I'll do Sarah Bryant, but this is my book, and the last one was Macy's. Sarah Bryant, Brighton Marina in the United Kingdom, the largest marina in Europe, a strange place between land and sea. I immersed myself for months in the quiet rhythm of the place and later revisited through newspaper clippings, promotional materials, and public notices dating to its design and construction in the 60s and 70s. I printed the map using chalk from the surrounding cliffs. Macy Chadwick, Sage Path, New Mexico, a changing topography of cracked dirt, enormous anthills, rings of grasses where cows once grazed, gnarled sticks, bright green grasses, and a variety of different sagebrush. On this virtual untouched land, I breathed in the wide open spaces and looked for patterns and repeated shapes in the landscapes. My location was Sugar Mountain in North Carolina, where I was living at the time. With 115 skiable acres over 20 runs and an elevation of 5,300 feet at the summit, 4,100 at the base, I mapped the demolition of the land in summer during the construction of a new high-speed lift. Denise, do you want to talk about creating our map of sounds from each location, which is here?
Yeah. So like Tricia said, we went to each of these sites and gathered drawings and impressions of the site. And one of the things that we felt would round out one of the something about the site was to gather sound at the same time. So we have a selection of sound that is the crunching of grass underfoot, wind banging and people's voices, birds dragging a stick along a chain link fence, and loud machinery. And so there's 5 of these. I sent these 5 recordings to a collaborator, Christopher Hall. He did worked with the computer program processing and was able to take those sound recordings and turn them into a visual representation of that sound. And he sent back 5 individual images of the sound. And here what we see in this image, I have combined those sounds into one image, one large, what I kept thinking of as a landscape image, kind of a compilation of all of the places that each of us spent time in. And then if you look on the right, you'll see those red circles. Each of those circles represent each of the sites in space if you superimposed a map on top of that. So we have California all the way to the left. We have some places, Alabama, Georgia, right there in the middle. And then we have Britain all the way over on the right-hand side. And in the middle, all the way across, we have the latitude and longitude of each of those spaces. So it's a different way to represent space and sound and the distance between all of us, but all of us still investigating these spaces close to our homes that related some way to the spaces that we lived in. And we can hear a little bit of that sound. There's the birds. We heard the loud machinery from the clay mine. The birds are from Taos, I think. This, I think, is Sarah's. A little bit of the people from the marina. The first one, I believe, was Tricia's. We heard some grass. That's what I kept thinking about, stepping on the grass. And then the last one, we haven't heard it yet, but the last, oh, here it is. That is what Katie is talking about in her piece, this fence that blocked off the space of the arsenal that you couldn't go into. So we hear the representation of that border that kept her out of that space.
So when we finished this project, we also decided to make a book that was planned to be a one-of-a-kind book. And we wanted to exchange images. I know somebody has said that we don't really put images in a folder and work with other images, but we thought it would be interesting to try it. So we each got images from somebody else. And Katie got images from Denise. And I got Katie's images, and maybe Katie could talk a little bit about what it was like to work with Denise's image, which comes from those wood blocks that you just saw. And then I took her images, these beautiful Mokuhanga and screen printed images, and worked with them and merged those with my images from Trace. So Katie, maybe you could talk about either how it felt in either direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that was really interesting about this project for me was to make a one-of-a-kind book, something that I didn't necessarily do. And it was, so it was new to me. It was really fun to be able to have something to kind of bounce off of. The plates that Denise sent me were laser cut plates, and I was able to print them and kind of respond to what they were. And I made this one-of-a-kind book it's titled A Fog with Valley, and it's thinking thinking about different layers and landscape and looking at something close up versus far away. I also had to get help from Sarah to make this box. I made so many mock-ups to get this one version, and I really learned a lot in the process of making it. And then the experience of giving my imagery to Tricia, I think one of the things as a printmaker is that I'm always working with these repeatable images, and it feels pretty exciting, I guess, is the best way to describe it, to just think of like giving something to a friend and see what they do with it. Because on one hand, it's still very familiar as an image, but it has the hand of Tricia in it now, and her approach to layering, and it becomes interesting and kind of has a new life to it, which is part of the reason that the collaboration always is, so beneficial.
So I think it's my turn to ask a question. And I'd like to ask Macy, but really everybody, one of the questions we get a lot is like, what are the hard things about collaborating as a group? Obviously complicated. So Macy, do you have an example or kind of general comments about what are the challenges of working this way and working with all of us? Be nice.
Yeah, please be nice. It's not really so much about working with the group that's the challenge for me, as the themes that Shift Lab chooses really pushes me out of my comfort zone. So in my own work, I'm often thinking about personal interpretations of things that happen in my life. My work is just usually based on my own personal experience, and then Shift Lab chooses something like the reference section of the library, and I am challenged to make a chronology of how the library went from an analog place to a digital place, and it's just like pushing me into a new places and working with subjects that I don't normally think of. But I do have to say, in solving that riddle of making the chronology, that I put little personal things into the timeline, like little dots where each one of us was born, and little slash marks where significant events happened in our lives, which are not labeled, but in the key, it's like birth of Shift Lab member and significant personal events. So I was able to kind of squeeze in a little bit of the personal into the chronology, but really it's about, being prompted to work with subject matter that I normally wouldn't approach. And I just love that, because it just, it pushes me in really good ways. So who else wants to jump in though? Because there's all kinds of challenges.
I mean, I was thinking what you were saying, and I immediately, especially looking at these books here, remembered that like Denise was very committed to using the color purple, and I just cannot use the color purple in any. I mean, but I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna do it, and and just like having a challenge like that is kind of amazing, and it has ultimately like I will use purple. I never did before, so. So it is interesting to think about the way that these, because you're not in control of every single decision, that you have to be flexible.
Mhm.
And in the end, it sort of, you end up growing in that sense.
Yeah, I was in charge of picking the color palette. How was I not going to include
I know.
palette? Like I started with purple.
There's purple. There's Katie's purple right there. And in
And then
response, I made that big purple swash mark because I was like, Katie can do it, so can I,
I think I'm kind of curious, in contrast, like how do people feel like they, have been inspired? How has it affected individual work?
I want to speak to that, because one of the things that that inspires me about working with this group is not necessarily one work that I can point to, but I think I have learned so much from each artist, whether it be a process, like we mentioned box making. Sarah taught us a box making workshop at one point, and it was just one day, but she gave me some great confidence and like, I know how to do this now, but also I know who to call. I mean, I think that's a big part of it, is learning from each other and helping each other. And that has inspired me in so many ways and pushed me in so many ways in my own work and my own collaborations. In learning about binding and printing and just the different ways that we all approach making and ideas. And I think that has been one of the most inspiring parts of working with this group.
Absolutely. I'm just going to jump in because this slide was sort of my answer to the what was inspired, has my personal work been inspired by Shift Lab, and quite literally the layers of pages in Multiple Discovery influence my current work, which is shown on the right. I mean, there's so many ways that Shift Lab has influenced me, but that's one of them, is considering different page sizes and just being willing to just think a little bit outside the box.
I also want to say that Shift Lab, in addition to being a group of people that makes work together, I agree with Denise about how now I know who to call. Like I had a project, Katie will remember, in November that I was working on, that is a hugely collaborative project, something I never would have taken on prior to working with Shift Lab. Frankly, I was not really a collaborator before we started 10 years ago. And now I feel like I collaborate more often than I make the work on my own. But I had this problem. Like I usually print on my book cloth and and it looked terrible for this book. And I just called Katie, help, I need to screen print. I don't know what to do. Can you do it? And then Katie, man, I drove up to Huntsville. This is the project on the left. I drove up to Huntsville and, goddamn, if Katie didn't screen print the covers of that book for me. At one point it was challenging, and I was like, Katie, do you want me to I can help. Just tell me what to do. I can print it. And she was like, you are not printing this. She knew I couldn't do it. So I just think whether or not as a collaborative group we're talking, or whether just as a community of people who make things in different ways, it's so helpful just to have people to call. I've consulted Tricia on typefaces. I've talked to Denise about laser cutting. I've basically begged Macy to let me hang around in her residency. So they're full of talent and their resources, as well as being friends. And I think that friendship is something that evolved out of this collaboration. So.
For sure. And that's back to the basic thing that made us come together, is our different practices and skill sets that we all bring to the table, and different approaches. I mean, the thing that I always love to say is Denise's approach to making the encyclopedia in the REF project. And it was like, we all were in discussion about what should the encyclopedia be? Should it be many, many volumes? Should it be made out of lead so that it's heavy? What should it be? And then Denise made this fantastic piece of fabric that just is all the layers of many pages of an encyclopedia printed over itself. And I just was blown away by this way of thinking. So it's just, I love what we all bring to the table.
I can read the brief description of Denise's encyclopedia. Actually, I have it in front of me from the REF book, which is very quick. But an encyclopedia covers knowledge or branches of knowledge in a comprehensive but summary fashion. Encyclopedias contain a vast amount of information arranged alphabetically. The book or set of books is intended to be read in sections, but rarely from beginning to end. Here, in this book, selections scanned from the first edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1771 were layered and etched onto a laser-cut plexiglass plate. The plate was printed and scanned again. The resulting image was enlarged and digitally printed onto a yard of fabric. I would never in a million years have thought about doing anything like that. And
absolutely.
enter Denise Bookwalter with her wild textile lifestyle.
I remember suggesting that, and you guys were like, yeah, do that. And I thought,
And here it comes, about to be pulled out. There it is. Yay, the encyclopedia. Yeah, it's so cool.
I think that might be an amazing place for us to pause here. Unless there's anything anyone else would like to add before we open it up for questions.
Oh,
I'm going
that's
to add that I called Tricia last week to ask about this new Riso, new to me Riso in my studio, and tried to print some Valentines on it. And then quite late at night, I called Tricia and said, "What is happening?" "Nothing is happening." And she talked us through it, Violet, my daughter, and I, through printing the Riso. So I totally value all of you and your talents and the amazing artists that you all are.
Thank you.
So should we let other people ask some questions? I'm sure there's some questions.
There's a couple
Yes.
in the
Yes, there
Q&A.
Yep, there's
Okay.
a couple in the Q&A which nicely hit on what you guys were just talking about from the same person. So they are, did you know from the beginning that you wanted to continue together? Or is it something you chose again and again to continue together? How often do you try to meet all at once together? It is a huge accomplishment that you have been able to sustain your collaboration over the years.
I don't remember ever questioning whether Shift Lab, whether we would do another project. I mean, we're sort of pausing now for the show at MCBA, but over the years, it was like, what are we going to do next? I mean, I don't know. Do you guys remember over the years sort of saying, not if we should do another project, but what, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there was always the intention to make the next project.
Mhm.
I think also if something was infuriating or frustrating or exhausting or a project was grinding us into the ground, it wasn't like, well, I don't want to do this anymore. It was like, what do we do next that will change this process so that it's more, not that that was happening on a frequent basis or anything, but I can think of moments where we were like, we're doing this kind of upside down. Like maybe we should think about it differently for the next round, you know?
And I think because we didn't have a lag between projects, we quickly turned around and said, okay, what did we not do in that project? Or what do we now want to explore in the next project that allowed us to really investigate new things? And when you look at all of the projects, they are all very different.
Mhm.
And I think in some way, I always think about each project as a different person from the group kind of unofficially organized the project. In some ways, I felt like I kind of organized Trace in some ways because I did that map that
Mhm.
that brought all of the things together, and somebody has to hold on to all of the copies somewhere. So like I had Trace, I think Sarah had Ref.
I think it's usually the person who binds it, you know, because the person who's in charge of binding the project ends up with them all.
Yeah.
So it's kind of logical for us to keep hold of them.
Yeah.
And I also, just in terms of when we meet and whether we make plans to meet, I think that one of the things that happens with us and with anyone, you know, is that everyone's life is complicated. And so like we very rarely are all in one place. I'm actually so excited to come to Minneapolis next week because it will be one of very few times that we've actually all been in the same room together. We see each other in different combinations all the time, but never as a group. And over the course of 10 years, you know, different things have happened, like amazing opportunities. I remember when Tricia got the Rome Prize and she was in Rome, you know, she can't meet. She, you know, other people need to pick up a little bit of slack because she's got this opportunity. Katie was in Taiwan. Or when Denise had the twins. It's not, I mean, there's always these times when one or two of us is just like kind of underwater with something else. And so we are trying to continue to work as a group and pick up and pull for each other at different times.
And I think there has to be that level of trust with the group. And I think Split Case was one of those instances that only 3 of us could travel to the Hamilton Wood Type Museum. And we made Split Case. But it's a Shift Lab publication. And I think there's really lovely moments of different people are participating at different times, but it's a Shift Lab project. And I really appreciate that. I think this is only the second time that we've all been together when we'll be there next week. I think one time we were all together at Codex. Can somebody correct me if I'm wrong? But I think this is really only the second time we've all been.
Yeah,
Third time?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
was- so we were together where? When
2
were we all-
codexes.
Okay, 2
No,
codexes.
last
we were all
summer we
together.
were at Macy's.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. So
How could we
4th time.
forget? How could we forget? It was like just a couple months ago. Okay, 3rd time.
I
But
just
it's
want
really-
to add something before we move on to a question, that a lot of our amazing visuals were done by Maggie Miner, who is my studio assistant, but was also Sarah's student at University of Alabama. So, you know, thank you to Maggie. Who
Maggie.
Thanks, Maggie.
Great, thanks, guys. There's no other questions coming into the chat or Q&A, I believe, so put that in now if you have anything else you would like to know. And I guess I maybe have one question to wrap it up. Is there anything in the works now that you can share, or like ideas for the future that you're excited about to work on together?
I think that we have taken a breath. You know, and it doesn't mean that we're not going to be working on something in the future, but after 10 years and this many projects, I think we needed to take a breath before we start planning. We did spend a really nice kind of calm period at Macy's residency last summer. And I think that part of what we're thinking and wondering is like, what can Shift Lab be if we're not constantly in production on a book? Like, could it be a lot of other different sorts of things? Like maybe we get together and make work, and maybe we make one thing in a brief period of time. Or so I think we're sort of reevaluating like what our bandwidth is and what we want to be doing in the coming years at this moment. Does anyone, am I mischaracterizing? I hope not.
No, I think that's great. And I think putting together this talk, I mean, there was a couple moments when we were kind of thinking about the chronology of Shift Lab. And there was one moment where we were like, wait, we did that in 2014. And, you know,
that
it's
was
just like,
busy.
looking back, we're like, how did we do 3 major things in 1 year? And I'm like, I think we were a lot younger. But I think, you know, it's just sort of looking back, there was a lot of density to the amount of things we were taking on. And so, yeah, just taking a breath and enjoying our show at MCBA. And really the show has been our focus. The show and the talk and the workshop have been our focus of this particular couple months time. So.
Great. Well, you're getting some nice comments in the chat, so check that out. If there's no other questions, thank you everyone for joining. I'm so excited to have you guys next week. So please, if you're in town, come stop by MCBA next Friday, 6 to 8 p.m. And if you are not in town, our next virtual artist talk will be in 2 weeks from now. If you're in town, it is also in person. It will be hybrid on Zoom and in person in Open Book, where MCBA is located. And it is our Early Career Jerome Residency Artist Talk, which will be with 3 artists. I am putting the link for registration for that in the chat. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Annika. And thank you to everybody at MCBA. It's been really a pleasure to put this together.
Yeah,
We're-
thank you.
Thank you.
It's amazing to see your work every day in the gallery. All right, I thank you, everyone. I am gonna go ahead and close the Zoom. Thank you. It was a great talk.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Night, everyone.
Hey.